My name is David Miller, and for 23 years, I wore the title of Elder in the Riverside Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses like a badge of honor. People in our small town of Cedar Falls, Ohio, knew me as the man who had the answers, the one who could quote scripture from memory, the spiritual shepherd who guided lost souls back to the truth. I had built my entire identity around serving Jehovah, around being the example that other families looked up to. My wife Martha and I had raised our daughter Emma in the truth, teaching her from infancy that the world outside our faith was dangerous, filled with Satan's influence, and that only by staying close to the organization could she find real happiness and eternal life. I believed every word of it with the fervor of a man who had staked everything on being right. It was a Tuesday evening in March when my carefully constructed world began to crumble. Emma had just turned 17, a bright girl with curious eyes that sometimes asked questions I found uncomfortable to answer. She was homeschooled, as were most of the children in our congregation, protected from the corrupting influence of worldly education. But she had been attending some classes at the local community center, something we had reluctantly agreed to after much prayer and consultation with other elders. It was supposed to be safe, supervised, just basic computer skills that would help her in the ministry work. That evening she came home later than usual, her cheeks flushed, her eyes holding a light I had never seen before. Martha was setting the table for dinner when Emma walked through the front door, and something in her demeanor made both of us stop what we were doing. "Emma, you're late," Martha said, her voice carrying that gentle reproach that mothers perfect over years of practice. "Brother Johnson called asking if you were sick. You missed the book study preparation meeting." Emma stood in the doorway, still wearing her coat, and for a moment she looked like she was going to say something important. Then she just nodded and mumbled an apology, hurrying upstairs to her room. Martha and I exchanged glances across the dinner table. We had raised Emma to be obedient, to understand that our schedule revolved around the organization's activities, and for her to miss a meeting without explanation was completely out of character. After dinner, I knocked on her bedroom door, finding her sitting on her bed, staring out the window at the street below. "Emma, we need to talk," I said, settling into the chair beside her desk. "Your mother and I are concerned. Missing meetings isn't like you, and you seem distracted lately. Is everything all right?" She turned to look at me, and for a moment I saw something in her expression that reminded me of myself at her age, before I had found the truth, when I was still searching for meaning in a world that seemed chaotic and uncertain. "Dad," she began, then stopped, biting her lower lip in that way she had done since she was a little girl when she was nervous. "I met someone at the computer class. His name is Jake, and he's really nice. We've been talking, and today—" She paused, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Today, he kissed me." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there, staring at my daughter, trying to process what she had just told me. In our world, dating was strictly supervised, and physical contact between unmarried young people was absolutely forbidden. The organization taught that even holding hands could lead to sexual immorality, and kissing was considered a serious transgression that required immediate action from the elders. I had given talks on this very subject, had counseled other parents dealing with similar situations, had always been firm in my conviction that maintaining moral purity was essential for spiritual health. But this was my daughter, my Emma, and suddenly all those clear-cut rules felt like stones in my chest. "Emma," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "please tell me you're not serious. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake." But she shook her head, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "It wasn't planned, Dad. We were just talking about the assignment, and he was helping me with something on the computer, and it just happened. It was just one kiss, but I liked it. I liked him." And the honesty in her voice, the innocence of her confession, should have made me feel protective, should have made me want to wrap my arms around her and tell her that making mistakes was part of growing up. Instead, all I could think about was what this meant for our family, for my position in the congregation, for everything I had worked to build over more than 2 decades of faithful service. That night, after Emma had gone to bed and Martha had cried herself to sleep, I sat in my study, surrounded by the Watchtower publications that had guided my life for so many years. I opened my Bible to the scriptures about maintaining moral purity, about the importance of keeping the congregation clean, about how even small compromises could lead to spiritual disaster. I had memorized these verses, had quoted them in countless talks and counseling sessions, but now they felt like accusations pointing directly at my failure as a father and spiritual head of my household. According to everything I had been taught, Emma's action was a serious transgression that required immediate reporting to the body of elders. As her father and as an elder myself, I was obligated to ensure that proper disciplinary action was taken. The organization was clear about this. Parents who failed to report their children's misconduct were considered accomplices to their sin. The next morning, I called Brother Stevens, the presiding overseer of our congregation, and requested an emergency meeting with the body of elders. My hands shook as I dialed the number, knowing that this phone call would set in motion a series of events that would change our family forever. Brother Stevens was a man in his 60s who had been serving as an elder for over 30 years, someone I had always respected and looked up to as a spiritual mentor. His voice was serious when he told me to come to the Kingdom Hall that evening after the regular meeting, and to come alone. I spent the day in a fog, going through the motions of my regular routine while my mind raced with possibilities and prayers for some kind of miracle that would make this situation disappear. The Kingdom Hall felt different that evening, colder somehow, as I sat across from the 3 other elders who made up our judicial committee. Brother Stevens sat in the middle, flanked by Brother Martinez and Brother Thompson, all of them wearing the grave expressions that I had seen so many times when we were dealing with serious congregational matters. These were men I had worked alongside for years, men whose families had shared meals with ours, men who had watched Emma grow up from a little girl into the young woman she was now. But tonight, they looked at me not as a friend and fellow elder, but as someone who had brought a problem before them that needed to be solved according to the organization's rules. "Brother Miller," Brother Stevens began, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came with his position, "you called this meeting because of a situation involving your daughter Emma. Please tell us exactly what happened." I repeated Emma's confession, watching their faces as I spoke, seeing the disappointment and concern that I knew must have been reflected in my own expression. When I finished, Brother Thompson leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him in a gesture I had seen him make countless times when he was about to deliver difficult counsel. "Brother Miller," he said, "this is indeed a serious matter. Your daughter has engaged in conduct that the organization clearly identifies as sexually immoral behavior. According to the Shepherd the Flock book, immediate action must be taken to address this transgression and protect the moral cleanliness of the congregation." Brother Martinez nodded in agreement, pulling out a well-worn copy of the Elder's Manual that served as our guide for handling disciplinary matters within the congregation. "David," he said, using my first name in a way that felt both familiar and ominous, "you know as well as we do what the procedure is in cases like this. Emma will need to appear before a judicial committee to determine the extent of her repentance and what disciplinary action is appropriate." His words hung in the air like a death sentence, and I felt my throat constrict as the reality of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about counseling or guidance. This was about formal discipline that could result in my daughter being disfellowshipped from the only community she had ever known. "But she's just 17, I found myself saying, my voice cracking slightly. "It was one kiss with a boy she barely knows. Surely we can handle this with some private counsel and increased supervision." Brother Stevens shook his head slowly, his expression unchanging. "Brother Miller, You're speaking as a father now, not as an elder. You know that the age of the wrongdoer doesn't change the seriousness of sexual immorality. The organization has been very clear about this. We cannot show favoritism or make exceptions based on personal relationships. That would compromise the integrity of the entire congregation. The meeting continued for another hour, during which the three elders outlined exactly what would happen next. Emma would be called before a judicial committee within the week. She would be questioned about the details of her interaction with this boy, Jake, about her attitude toward what she had done, and about her commitment to avoiding such behavior in the future. Depending on her responses and the committee's assessment of her repentance, she could face anything from private reproof to public reproof to complete disfellowshipping. As they spoke, I felt like I was watching my daughter's future being dissected by men who claimed to love her, but were prepared to destroy her life in the name of maintaining organizational purity. "There's something else we need to discuss," Brother Thompson said as the meeting was winding down. "Your role in this situation as both Emma's father and as an elder in this congregation." I looked up at him, confused by the serious tone in his voice. "What do you mean?" I asked, though some part of me already knew what was coming. "David," Brother Stevens interjected, "the organization expects parents, especially elder parents, to take decisive action when their children engage in wrongdoing. If Emma is living in your home while unrepentant of sexual immorality, that makes you complicit in her sin. You would be viewed as someone who is tolerating and enabling immoral behavior within your own household." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had heard this principle discussed in elders' meetings before, had even agreed with it when it applied to other families, but I had never imagined it would be applied to my own situation. "Are you saying that if Emma doesn't show sufficient repentance, I would need to remove her from my home?" I asked, hoping desperately that I was misunderstanding their implications. Brother Martinez leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. "David, if your daughter is disfellowshipped and you continue to provide her with room and board, continue to treat her as if nothing has changed, then yes, you would be showing disrespect for the organization's decision and demonstrating that you don't truly support Jehovah's standards of moral purity." I drove home that night in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had just heard. When I walked through the front door, Martha was waiting in the living room, her face pale with worry. "How did it go?" she asked, though the expression on my face probably already told her everything she needed to know. I sat down beside her on the couch, where we had spent so many evenings reading Watchtower publications together, where we had conducted Emma's personal Bible study when she was little, where we had dreamed about watching her grow up to become a faithful servant of Jehovah. Now that same couch felt like a place where our family was about to be torn apart. "They're going to call Emma before a judicial committee," I told Martha, watching her face crumble as the words sank in. "And if she's disfellowshipped, if they determine that she's not sufficiently repentant, then—" I paused, unable to finish the sentence. Martha looked at me with growing alarm. "Then what, David? What aren't you telling me?" I took a deep breath, feeling like I was about to betray everything I had ever believed in. "Then we would be expected to remove her from our home. If we allow a disfellowshipped person to continue living here, eating our food, being part of our daily life, the organization would view that as supporting her rebellion against Jehovah's standards." Martha stared at me in stunned silence for several long moments before the tears began to flow. "You're talking about throwing our daughter out of her own home because she kissed a boy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "David, she's 17 years old. She's our baby. Where would she go? What would happen to her?" I wanted to comfort her, wanted to tell her that it would never come to that, but the truth was that I didn't know. The organization's rules were clear, and I had seen other families torn apart when children were disfellowshipped and parents were forced to choose between their offspring and their standing in the congregation. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Martha cried softly beside me. Down the hall, I could hear Emma moving around in her room, probably unable to sleep as well. I thought about all the times I had stood at the podium in our Kingdom Hall, delivering talks about the importance of maintaining moral purity, about trusting in Jehovah's organization even when his requirements seemed difficult to understand. I had spoken with such certainty, such conviction about the need to put spiritual concerns above emotional attachments. But now, faced with the possibility of losing my daughter, those same principles felt like chains wrapped around my chest, making it impossible to breathe. The next few days passed in a blur of tense conversations and awkward silences. Emma seemed to sense that something terrible was coming, though Martha and I tried to shield her from the full implications of what the elders had told us. She went about her usual routine of personal study and meeting preparation, but there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Several times I caught her looking at me as if she wanted to ask me something, but then she would turn away without speaking. I wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her that everything would be all right, but I didn't know if that was true anymore. You know, my dear friends who are listening to this story, I never imagined, when I started recording these memories, that it would be so difficult to relive these moments. But there's something healing about sharing this burden that I've carried alone for so many years. If you're still with me, if my story is touching something in your heart, I want you to know that you're not alone in whatever struggles you might be facing. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones between what we've been taught is right and what our hearts know is true. Please, if this story is meaningful to you, let me know in the comments below. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if you've ever faced impossible choices between loyalty and love. Your words give this old man strength to continue sharing these painful memories. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel. Not because I need the numbers, but because I need to know that these words aren't disappearing into the void, that someone out there understands the weight of the decisions we sometimes have to make. The day of Emma's judicial committee hearing arrived faster than I had hoped it would. Brother Stevens had called to inform us that the meeting would take place on Thursday evening at 7 o'clock and that Emma should come prepared to discuss her actions and her attitude toward what she had done. The committee would consist of 3 elders from our congregation, Brother Stevens, Brother Martinez, and Brother Thompson. As an elder myself, I knew exactly how these meetings proceeded, knew the kinds of questions they would ask, knew the standards they would use to judge whether Emma was sufficiently repentant to avoid disfellowshipping. Martha spent the morning helping Emma choose what to wear to the committee meeting, as if the right dress could somehow influence the outcome of what was to come. I watched them from the doorway of Emma's bedroom, seeing my wife's hands shake as she smoothed down our daughter's hair, both of them trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy, while we all knew that this evening could change everything forever. Emma had been unusually quiet since we told her about the meeting, asking only practical questions about what time she needed to be there and how long it might take. She hadn't asked what would happen if the committee decided against her, and I was grateful for that small mercy, because I wasn't sure I could have answered her honestly. At dinner that evening, none of us could eat much. Martha had prepared Emma's favorite meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes and green beans, but it sat mostly untouched on our plates while we made awkward conversation about mundane things like the weather and upcoming congregation activities. Emma kept glancing at the clock on the kitchen wall, and I could see the anxiety building in her eyes as 6:30 approached. Finally, she pushed back from the table and said quietly, "I guess it's time to go." Martha immediately stood up and reached for her coat, but Emma shook her head. "Mom, Dad said I need to go alone. You can't come with me." The drive to the Kingdom Hall was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Emma sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood, and I found myself memorizing her profile as if I might not see it again for a very long time. When we pulled into the parking lot, I saw Brother Stephen's car already there, along with Brother Martinez's pickup truck and Brother Thompson's sedan. The building looked the same as it always did, with its simple brick exterior and modest sign identifying it as the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses. But tonight, it felt like a courthouse where my daughter was about to be tried for crimes that seemed so minor compared to the punishment she might face. "Emma," I said as we sat in the car, the engine ticking as it cooled down, "I want you to know that no matter what happens in there, your mother and I love you. We've always loved you, and we always will." She turned to look at me, and I saw tears starting to form in her eyes. "Dad, what if they decide to disfellowship me? What happens then?" The question I had been dreading hung between us in the silence of the car. I wanted to lie to her, wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, that our family would stay together no matter what the committee decided. But I had raised her to value honesty, and I couldn't start lying to her now when she needed the truth most. "If they disfellowship you," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, "it would mean that the congregation would no longer view you as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. People in the congregation wouldn't be able to socialize with you or include you in their activities. And," I paused, struggling with the words that felt like broken glass in my throat, "and your mother and I would be expected to limit our association with you as well, to show that we support the organization's decision and don't approve of the behavior that led to your disfellowshipping." Emma stared at me in shock, as if she had never considered that the consequences might extend to our family relationship. "But I'm your daughter," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're my dad. That doesn't change, because some men in a room decide I'm not repentant enough." I felt my heart breaking as I looked at her young face, so full of confusion and hurt. "Emma, the organization teaches that our loyalty to Jehovah and his earthly representatives has to come before our personal relationships, even family relationships. It's one of the hardest things about serving God, but it's what separates true Christians from those who follow their emotions instead of divine guidance." Even as I spoke the words, they felt hollow and rehearsed, like I was quoting from a publication rather than speaking from my heart. We walked into the Kingdom Hall together, and I showed Emma to the small library room where the committee would meet with her. The three elders were already seated at a table, with one empty chair facing them where Emma would sit during her questioning. Brother Stephen smiled at her kindly and gestured toward the chair. "Emma, please have a seat. We appreciate you coming tonight, and we want you to know that we're here because we care about your spiritual welfare and want to help you get back on the right path." I started to leave the room, but Brother Thompson called my name. "David, we'd like you to stay for the opening portion of the meeting. Since you're Emma's father and an elder in the congregation, your presence might help her feel more comfortable." I took a seat against the wall, trying to make myself invisible while the committee began their questioning. Brother Stevens opened with a prayer, asking for Jehovah's guidance in helping them make a decision that would be pleasing to God and beneficial for Emma's spiritual growth. Then he turned to Emma and said, "We'd like you to tell us, in your own words, exactly what happened between you and this young man Jake. Please don't leave out any details, even if they seem embarrassing or unimportant." Emma glanced at me nervously before beginning her account, her voice shaking slightly as she described how she had met Jake at the computer class, how they had talked several times over the course of a few weeks, and how the kiss had happened almost spontaneously while they were working on an assignment together. Brother Martinez leaned forward when she finished, his expression serious. "Emma, when this young man kissed you, did you resist? Did you try to stop him or pull away?" Emma's cheeks flushed red as she answered. "At first I was surprised, but then, no, I didn't pull away. I kissed him back." The admission hung in the air like an accusation, and I saw all three elders exchange meaningful glances. Brother Thompson made a note on the pad in front of him before asking, "And how did you feel about what happened? Were you sorry that it occurred, or did you enjoy the experience?" This was the crucial question, the one that would determine whether Emma was viewed as a victim of circumstance or as someone who had willingly participated in immoral conduct. I found myself holding my breath as I waited for her answer, praying that she would give them what they wanted to hear, even if it wasn't entirely true. But Emma had always been honest to a fault, and she didn't start lying now. "I felt confused," she said quietly. "Part of me knew it was wrong according to what I've been taught, but part of me liked it. It felt nice to have someone care about me in that way, someone who wasn't thinking about whether I was spiritual enough or whether I was setting a good example for other young people in the congregation." The honesty in her answer seemed to seal her fate. I watched Brother Stephen's face harden slightly as he processed what she had said. "Emma, do you understand that what you've described is sexual immorality according to biblical standards? And do you understand that by admitting you enjoyed it and didn't resist, you're showing that you participated willingly in conduct that Jehovah condemns?" Emma nodded slowly, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "Yes, I understand that's what you believe. But I don't understand why a kiss between two people who care about each other is so terrible that it deserves this kind of punishment." Her words caused an immediate reaction from the committee. Brother Thompson set down his pen and looked at her sternly. "Emma, it's not what we believe, it's what the Bible teaches, and your attitude right now, questioning whether God's standards are reasonable, shows a lack of repentance that is very concerning." Brother Martinez nodded in agreement. A truly repentant person doesn't question whether their actions were really wrong. They accept correction humbly and express genuine sorrow for disappointing Jehovah. I wanted to intervene, to explain that Emma was just confused and scared, but I knew that any attempt to defend her would only make things worse. The questioning continued for another 30 minutes, with the committee probing deeper into Emma's feelings about what had happened and her commitment to avoiding similar situations in the future. When they asked if she planned to continue seeing Jake, Emma hesitated before answering that she didn't know. "He's a nice person, and he makes me feel happy in a way I've never felt before. I know you want me to say I'll never see him again, but I can't promise that because I don't think it would be honest." That response seemed to confirm everything the committee suspected about her attitude. Finally, Brother Stevens asked me to escort Emma to the main auditorium while the committee deliberated. We sat together in the empty hall, surrounded by the chairs where our congregation gathered 3 times a week to study Watchtower publications and listen to talks about living according to biblical principles. Emma leaned against my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a little girl, and I felt the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on both of us. "Dad," she whispered, "whatever they decide, I want you to know that I never meant to cause problems for our family. I just wanted to know what it felt like to be cared about by someone who chose to be with me, not someone who was with me because we happened to be in the same religion." 15 minutes later, Brother Stevens came to get us. The committee had reached their decision, and Emma was being disfellowshipped for unrepentant sexual immorality. The announcement would be made at the next midweek meeting, and from that moment forward, she would be cut off from all social contact with anyone in the congregation. As we drove home in silence, I realized that the real test was just beginning. Now, I would have to choose between my daughter and everything I had built my life around, between the love I felt for the child I had raised and the loyalty I owed to the organization that had given my existence meaning and purpose. The announcement was made on a Tuesday evening during our regular midweek meeting. I sat in my usual seat in the front row, the place reserved for elders and their families, watching Brother Stevens stand at the podium and deliver the words that would officially sever my daughter from the only community she had ever known. "We regret to inform you that Emma Miller is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses," he said in the same tone he might use to announce a change in the meeting schedule. The congregation received the news in complete silence, exactly as they had been trained to do. No gasps of surprise, no murmurs of sympathy, just the quiet acceptance of a decision that had been made by men they trusted to represent God's will on earth. Martha gripped my hand so tightly during the announcement that I thought she might break my fingers, but neither of us showed any outward reaction. We had been coached by the other elders on how to behave during and after the announcement, reminded that our response would be watched carefully by the congregation as an indication of whether we truly supported the committee's decision or were allowing parental emotion to override spiritual loyalty. Emma wasn't present for the announcement, having been told that it would be inappropriate for her to attend meetings while her spiritual status was being determined. She was at home, probably sitting in her bedroom, knowing that at this very moment her entire social world was being officially taken away from her. After the meeting ended, several congregation members approached Martha and me with carefully worded expressions of sympathy. Sister Johnson, an elderly woman who had known Emma since she was a baby, squeezed my arm and said quietly, "Brother Miller, we're praying for your family during this difficult time. We know this must be hard, but Jehovah's discipline is always motivated by love." Brother Carter, whose own son had been disfellowshipped 3 years earlier for smoking cigarettes, pulled me aside and offered what he clearly intended as encouraging counsel. "David, I know what you're going through right now. The hardest part is maintaining your loyalty to the organization when your heart is telling you to protect your child. But remember, by supporting the committee's decision, you're actually showing Emma the greatest love possible. You're demonstrating that some things are more important than family relationships." The drive home felt like a funeral procession. Martha stared out the passenger window without speaking, and I could see her reflection in the glass, tears streaming down her face in the glow of the streetlights. When we pulled into our driveway, Emma's bedroom light was still on, and I could see her silhouette moving around behind the curtains. For a moment, I sat in the car, wondering what we were supposed to do now. The committee had been very clear about the expectations going forward. Emma could continue living in our home, but we were to limit our interaction with her to only the most essential communication. No family meals together, no casual conversation, no participation in family activities or outings. We were to treat her with the same coolness that any other congregation member would show to a disfellowshipped person. When we walked into the house, Emma was waiting in the living room, still wearing the dress she had put on for the meeting she wasn't allowed to attend. Her eyes were red from crying, but she had composed herself enough to ask the question we all knew was coming. "So it's official now," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. "I'm disfellowshipped." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without my voice breaking. Emma looked from me to Martha and back again. "And now you're supposed to stop talking to me, right? Even though I live in the same house as you." Martha made a small sound that was half sob, half moan, and turned away, unable to look at our daughter. "Emma," I said, forcing myself to speak with the authority that had been drilled into me through years of elder training, "the committee's decision stands. You're welcome to continue living here. But your mother and I need to show that we support the organization's judgment and don't approve of the behavior that led to your disfellowshipping. That means we can't treat you the same way we did before. We can speak to you about practical matters, about household responsibilities, but we can't have the kind of close relationship we used to have." Even as I spoke the words, they felt like poison in my mouth. Emma stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something die in her eyes. "So let me understand this correctly," she said, her voice taking on a hardness I had never heard before. "Because I kissed a boy who likes me, because I admitted that I enjoyed feeling cared about by someone outside this religion, you're going to treat me like a stranger in my own home?" When I didn't answer immediately, she continued, "Dad, I'm 17 years old. In most families, parents would be relieved that their teenager's biggest rebellion was one innocent kiss. But in our family, that's enough to make you choose your religion over your own daughter. Her words hit me like physical blows, but I forced myself to maintain the composure that had been expected of me. Emma, this isn't about choosing religion over family. This is about helping you understand the seriousness of what you've done and encouraging you to come back to Jehovah's organization. The temporary separation we're implementing is meant to motivate you to seek reinstatement. She laughed bitterly, a sound that seemed far too mature for someone who'd been my little girl just a few months ago. Temporary separation. Dad, look at me. Look at what you're doing to our family. Do you really think this is what a loving God would want? The next few weeks were the most difficult of my life. Emma continued to live in our house, but it was like sharing space with a ghost. She came and went quietly, prepared her own meals, did her own laundry, and spoke to us only when absolutely necessary. Martha tried to maintain the emotional distance that the organization required, but I could see how much the effort was costing her. She lost weight, developed dark circles under her eyes, and jumped every time the phone rang, hoping it might be someone calling with news that Emma had requested a meeting with the elders to begin the reinstatement process. I threw myself into congregation activities with renewed vigor, serving on more judicial committees, giving more talks, conducting more Bible studies with interested people in our territory. Part of me genuinely believed that by demonstrating increased spiritual activity, I might somehow convince Jehovah to soften Emma's heart and bring her back to the truth. But another part of me was simply trying to distract myself from the growing realization that I was destroying my relationship with my daughter in the name of serving a God who was supposed to be love itself. 3 weeks after Emma's disfellowshipping, I came home from a circuit overseer's visit to find her packing a suitcase on her bed. My heart stopped as I watched her folding the clothes that Martha had bought for her just a few months earlier, back when our biggest worry was whether Emma was developing sufficient appreciation for the spiritual food provided by the organization. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. Emma didn't look up from her packing as she responded, "I'm leaving, Dad. I can't live in a house where my own parents treat me like I'm contaminated. I found a place to stay with some people I met through Jake. They're not Jehovah's Witnesses, but they're kind and they don't think I'm evil because I kissed someone." I stood in her doorway watching her pack, knowing that I should try to stop her, but feeling paralyzed by the competing loyalties that were tearing me apart. According to everything I had been taught, Emma leaving our home was actually the desired outcome. The organization's literature was clear that disfellowshipped family members should face consequences serious enough to motivate them to seek reinstatement, and being forced to leave the comfort and security of their family home was often an effective motivator. But watching my daughter fold her clothes and gather her few possessions, I felt like I was witnessing the death of everything that had ever mattered to me. "Emma, please don't do this," I heard myself saying, stepping into her room despite knowing that showing too much concern for her welfare might be interpreted as not fully supporting the disfellowshipping decision. "You're 17 years old. Where will you go? How will you support yourself? What about finishing your education?" She finally looked up at me, and I saw a maturity in her face that hadn't been there a month ago. "Dad, I've been thinking about this for weeks. I can get my GED and then apply for community college. Jake's family has offered to help me, and there are programs for young people who need assistance. I'll figure it out." The casualness with which she discussed rebuilding her entire life without us was devastating. "But Emma," I said desperately, "this is your home. Your mother and I love you even if we can't show it the way we used to. If you leave now, if you go live with worldly people, you'll be exposed to influences that will make it even harder for you to come back to the truth." Emma zipped up her suitcase and turned to face me fully. "Dad, the truth? What truth? That a loving God wants parents to treat their children like enemies because they made one mistake? That showing affection to someone outside your religion is worse than lying or stealing or hurting people? I've been reading the Bible on my own, without the Watchtower magazines to tell me what it means, and I'm not finding this harsh, unforgiving God you serve." Martha appeared in the doorway behind me, her face pale and drawn. She had obviously been listening to our conversation from the hallway, probably struggling with the same internal battle that was raging inside me. "Emma," she said quietly, "please don't leave like this. Stay, and we'll work something out. Maybe if you write a letter to the committee expressing genuine repentance, maybe if you commit to never seeing that boy again." Emma shook her head sadly. "Mom, I'm not going to lie and say I'm sorry for feeling cared about by someone who accepts me as I am, and I'm not going to promise to live my life according to rules that seem designed to keep people isolated and afraid." She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the door, pausing to look at both of us one more time. "I want you both to know that I'll always love you, no matter what your religion tells you to feel about me. And if you ever decide that being my parents is more important than being loyal to an organization that asks you to choose between the two, you know where to find me." Then she was gone, walking out the front door that she had entered as a baby 17 years ago, carrying everything she owned in one small suitcase and leaving behind a family that had been torn apart by the very beliefs that were supposed to bring us closer to God and to each other. The house felt like a tomb after Emma left. Martha and I moved through our daily routines like sleepwalkers, maintaining the appearance of normal life while everything that had given our existence meaning slowly crumbled around us. We attended all our meetings, participated in the field service work, hosted our assigned book study group in our living room, but the joy and sense of purpose that had once characterized our spiritual activities had been replaced by a hollow, going through the motions that fooled no one, least of all ourselves. Other congregation members offered their continued support and reminded us that we had done the right thing by allowing Emma to face the consequences of her choices. But their words felt like salt in wounds that refused to heal. Brother Stevens called me into his office 6 weeks after Emma's departure to discuss what he delicately referred to as my spiritual readjustment period. He sat behind his desk in the small office adjacent to the Kingdom Hall's main auditorium, surrounded by shelves of Watchtower publications and framed certificates recognizing his years of faithful service to the organization. His expression was kind but concerned as he gestured for me to take the chair across from his desk, the same chair where I had sat countless times before when we were discussing congregation matters or planning upcoming assemblies. But this time, I was the subject under discussion, and the reversal felt surreal. "David," he began, his voice carrying the pastoral tone that elders were trained to use when counseling congregation members who were struggling spiritually, "I've been observing you these past few weeks, and I'm concerned about your emotional state. I understand that Emma's situation has been difficult for you and Martha, but I'm worried that you're allowing parental feelings to interfere with your spiritual balance." I looked at him across the desk, this man who had been my friend and mentor for over a decade, and realized that he genuinely couldn't understand why losing my daughter might affect my ability to focus on organizational responsibilities. "Brother Stevens," I said carefully, "I'm trying to maintain my spiritual routine and fulfill my elder duties, but I have to admit that it's been challenging. Emma was such a big part of our lives, and her absence is affecting both Martha and me more than we expected." He nodded sympathetically, but I could see the slight disapproval in his eyes as he processed my admission. "David, that's exactly what I'm concerned about. The organization has provided clear guidance on how to handle situations like this, and part of that guidance involves accepting that some family relationships may need to be permanently altered in order to maintain our loyalty to Jehovah. If you're still struggling with Emma's absence after 6 weeks, it suggests that you may be holding on to emotional attachments that are preventing you from fully embracing the committee's decision." His words felt like a diagnosis of spiritual illness, as if my love for my daughter was a symptom of faithlessness that needed to be treated and cured. "I'm not questioning the committee's decision," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I wasn't sure they were entirely true. "I understand that Emma's behavior required disciplinary action. I'm just finding it harder than I expected to adjust to not having her in our daily lives." "No." Brother Stevens leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "David, I think it might be beneficial for you to step back from some of your elder responsibilities for a while, just until you've had time to work through these emotional challenges. We can't have elders who are struggling with doubts or second-guessing the organization's decisions, serving on judicial committees, or providing spiritual guidance to other congregation members." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. My position as an elder wasn't just a title. It was the foundation of my identity within the congregation and the source of whatever respect and authority I commanded in our community. To have that position questioned because I was grieving the loss of my daughter felt like a second punishment on top of the pain I was already experiencing. "Brother Stevens, I don't think I'm struggling with doubts about the organization. I'm just struggling with missing my daughter. Surely that's a natural human emotion that doesn't disqualify me from serving as an elder." He shook his head slowly, his expression patient but firm. "David, the Bible warns us about the dangers of natural human emotions when they conflict with spiritual requirements. Remember, Jesus himself said that anyone who loves father or mother, son or daughter more than him is not worthy of him. Your continued emotional attachment to Emma, even after she's been disfellowshipped for unrepentant wrongdoing, suggests that you may be loving your daughter more than you love Jehovah." I left that meeting feeling more confused and isolated than ever before. The organization that had been my spiritual home for over 2 decades was now suggesting that my love for my child was evidence of insufficient devotion to God. That evening, as Martha and I sat across from each other at our dinner table, eating another silent meal in the house that had once been filled with Emma's laughter and chatter, I found myself questioning things that I had never allowed myself to question before. Was it really God's will that parents should be able to turn off their love for their children like flipping a switch? Did a loving Heavenly Father really want earthly fathers to choose organizational loyalty over parental affection? 3 months after Emma left, Martha suffered what our family doctor called a nervous breakdown. She had been losing weight steadily since our daughter's disfellowshipping, sleeping poorly, and struggling to maintain even the pretense of normal functioning. One Tuesday morning, I found her sitting on Emma's bed, clutching one of our daughter's old stuffed animals and sobbing so hard that she couldn't speak coherently. When I tried to comfort her, she pushed me away and screamed that she couldn't live in a house full of ghosts anymore, that she couldn't pretend to support a decision that had destroyed our family in the name of serving God. The doctor prescribed medication for depression and anxiety and recommended that Martha take a leave of absence from her part-time job at the local bank where she had worked for 8 years. But the medication couldn't address the real source of her suffering, and the leave of absence only gave her more time to sit in our empty house and think about the daughter who had been cut out of our lives with surgical precision. I tried to encourage her to increase her participation in congregation activities, thinking that immersing herself more deeply in spiritual routines might help heal her emotional wounds, but she rejected my suggestions with a bitterness that frightened me. "David," she said one evening as we sat in our living room after another meeting where we had pretended to be spiritually strong while dying inside, "do you ever wonder if we made the wrong choice? Do you ever think about what would have happened if we had just told the elders that we would handle Emma's situation privately as a family?" The question hung in the air between us like a dangerous explosive device. To even consider that we might have chosen wrongly was to question the entire foundation of our faith, to suggest that the organization we had trusted with our lives and our daughter's future might not actually represent God's will on earth. "Martha," I said carefully, We can't start second-guessing decisions that were made according to biblical principles. The elders used the scriptures to guide their judgment, and we supported their decision because we believe that Jehovah's organization provides reliable spiritual guidance. But even as I spoke the words, they felt hollow and rehearsed. Martha looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of sadness and anger that seemed to cut right through all the carefully constructed defenses I had built around my faith. "David, look at us. Look at what we've become. We've lost our daughter. I'm on medication for depression. You're being questioned about your fitness to serve as an elder, and our marriage is falling apart. If this is what following biblical principles looks like, then maybe we need to reconsider what we think we know about God's will." That night, for the first time in my adult life, I found myself unable to pray. I sat on the edge of our bed, trying to find words to address the God I had served faithfully for over 20 years, but every attempt felt forced and artificial. How could I thank Jehovah for his blessings when my family had been destroyed? How could I ask for guidance when following the guidance I had already received had led to such devastating consequences? How could I express love for a God whose earthly representatives had forced me to choose between him and my own child? 6 months after Emma's departure, I received a letter from her that changed everything. It arrived on a Saturday morning, addressed to both Martha and me in Emma's familiar handwriting. Martha's hands shook as she opened the envelope, and we read the letter together, sitting side by side on our couch like two people examining evidence of a crime we had committed. Emma wrote that she was doing well, that she had gotten her GED and enrolled in community college, that she was working part-time at a bookstore and living with a family who had taken her in and treated her with more kindness than she had experienced in our house during her final weeks as a Jehovah's Witness. But the part of the letter that destroyed me was near the end, where she wrote about her spiritual journey since leaving our home. She had been reading the Bible without the filter of Watchtower publications, she said, and had discovered a God of love and forgiveness who bore little resemblance to the harsh, demanding deity that our organization worshipped. She had found a small church where people asked questions without being labeled as spiritually weak, where families stayed together even when individual members made mistakes, where love was considered more important than organizational loyalty. She wrote that she prayed for Martha and me every day, asking God to help us find the courage to choose love over fear, relationship over religion, family over institutional demands. The letter concluded with an invitation that felt like both a lifeline and a test of everything I claimed to believe. Emma had written down her address and phone number, along with an open invitation for us to visit her whenever we felt ready to put our relationship with her above our relationship with the organization that had demanded we choose between them. She signed the letter simply, "Your daughter, who loves you both unconditionally," and included a photograph of herself standing in front of the bookstore where she worked, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl, before the weight of organizational expectations had begun to dim the light in her eyes. Martha and I spent hours that day talking about Emma's letter, examining every word as if it contained coded messages that might reveal the path forward for our broken family. For the first time in months, I saw hope flicker in Martha's eyes as she spoke about the possibility of seeing our daughter again, of healing the wounds that had been tearing our family apart since that terrible evening when Emma had walked out our front door with everything she owned in one small suitcase. But I also felt the familiar fear rising in my chest, the terror of disappointing God and losing my eternal salvation that had been drilled into me through decades of organizational indoctrination. That evening, as I sat in my study surrounded by the Watchtower publications that had guided my thinking for so many years, I found myself reading Emma's letter again and again, weighing her words against everything I had been taught about loyalty to Jehovah's organization. The literature was clear about the dangers of associating with disfellowshipped family members, warning that such contact could lead to spiritual contamination and eventual apostasy. But Emma's letter radiated a peace and joy that had been missing from our house ever since we had chosen organizational loyalty over parental love. And I couldn't help wondering if the real spiritual contamination might be the fear and isolation that had poisoned our family in the name of serving God. My dear friends, as I come to the end of this painful story, I want you to know that sharing these memories with you has been both heartbreaking and healing. For too many years, I carried the weight of these decisions alone, convinced that admitting my doubts or questioning my choices would somehow dishonor the faith that had once meant everything to me. But I've learned that hiding our struggles doesn't make them disappear, and that sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is admit when the path we've been following has led us away from the very love we were seeking to serve. If my story has touched your heart, if you've recognized something of your own journey in the choices I faced, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me about the times when you've had to choose between institutional loyalty and personal relationships, between what you were taught was right and what your heart knew was true. Your stories give me hope that none of us have to face these impossible choices alone. And please, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to this channel and sharing these videos with others who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggles. Sometimes the most healing thing we can offer each other is the simple acknowledgement that the questions we're afraid to ask out loud are the same questions that keep other people awake at night, wondering if there might be a different way to live, a different way to love, a different way to serve whatever God we believe is calling us toward truth and wholeness and genuine human connection. The choice I faced that day, holding Emma's letter in my trembling hands, would determine not just the future of my relationship with my daughter, but the very foundation of everything I had built my life upon for more than 2 decades of faithful service to an organization that demanded I choose between my faith and my family, never considering that perhaps a God of love would never ask a father to make such a choice in the first place.